You sit in your car after church, with both hands resting on the steering wheel, and for a minute you just let the engine stay off and the silence stay loud. The sermon ended. People smiled. Somebody in the lobby asked how you were doing, and you answered the way a lot of believers in America answer when the truth feels too heavy for small talk. You said, "I'm blessed." Maybe you even said God is good because He is. But deep down, you have been carrying something bruised for a long time. You have been the one who kept showing up, kept praying, kept serving, kept paying bills, kept checking on other people, kept trying not to fall apart in the frozen food aisle, at the kitchen sink in the church parking lot, at the doctor's office, in the break room at work, and in the dark when sleep would not come. And still the same people who should have recognized your heart treated your faith like weakness, your quietness like irrelevance, your patience like passivity, and your consistency like something ordinary. But tonight, I need you to hear this with your spirit wide open. God has not been absent from your hidden years. He has been watching every insult you swallowed, every prayer you whispered, every time you chose peace over pettiness, every time you kept your character when nobody was clapping for it. This message is for the one who has been dismissed, underestimated, and looked past. So, before we go deeper, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and leave "God sees me" in the comments if this word is already meeting you where you live. Because what heaven is about to do in your life will not be private forever. And the same people who wrote you off are going to watch God place honor on what they never had the eyes to value. The hard part for you was never simply that people misunderstood you. The hard part was that they stood close enough to benefit from your loyalty while still refusing to recognize your worth. There is a particular kind of ache in being useful but unseen. That ache does not always announce itself with drama. Sometimes it shows up at Thanksgiving when you are the one who brought the food, cleaned the kitchen, remembered everybody's needs, and still nobody spoke your name with tenderness. Sometimes it shows up at work when you are the steady one, the reliable one, the one who trains everybody else, covers, shifts, solves problems, keeps your head down, and somehow the promotion goes to the louder person with better politics and less integrity. Sometimes it shows up in church when you are faithful enough to stack chairs, pray for people, teach the class, visit the sick, tithe when money is tight, and still the room only seems to notice the gifted personalities with microphones. You were there. You mattered. You carried weight. But because what God put in you did not come wrapped in the kind of package people celebrate quickly, they treated treasure like it was background furniture. And for a while, because you are human, because you live in a real body with real emotions and not in some stained glass fantasy world, you started wondering whether they were right. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am too quiet. Maybe I really am hard to understand. Maybe I missed my window. Maybe I just do not have what it takes. That is how dismissal gets under the skin. It does not always come in the form of open cruelty. Sometimes it comes through 1,000 small moments that say, without ever saying it directly, "You are not the one we would choose." That kind of wound can follow a person into prayer. It can sit beside you in church. It can ride home with you after Bible study. It can stare at you while you brush your teeth at night. It can make a grown man or woman in their 50s or 60s wonder why they still feel 12 years old around certain family members. It can make you second-guess your own voice in a meeting, your own instincts in a relationship, your own calling in ministry. Because repeated dismissal has a way of making even strong people feel ghost-like. But the truth God is pressing into your spirit now is that they did not accurately measure you. They mishandled what they could not classify. They undervalued what heaven placed inside you because it did not flatter their ego, fit their categories, or arrive with enough noise to impress their flesh. The world is often quick to reward charisma, speed, and self-promotion, but the kingdom of God has always had a different eye. Scripture keeps showing us that the Lord sees what crowds overlook. David was out with the sheep while more polished options stood in the house. Joseph carried a dream before anybody could bear the weight of it. Hannah was mistaken for broken in the wrong way before God turned her grief into history. Jesus himself came without the kind of outward packaging people expected. So do not let the opinions of people with shallow eyesight become the verdict over your life. Some people only know how to value what performs for them. Some only know how to celebrate what is already visible. Some only know how to respect what another person has already approved. But God is not running your destiny through a popularity contest. He is not asking the most dismissive people in your life to serve as the final judges of your worth. And the reason this matters so deeply is because many of you have not just been wounded by enemies. You have been wearied by familiar faces. Family members who know your whole history but still talk to you like your growth never happened. People who remember your old mistakes more clearly than your present obedience. Co-workers who leaned on your character and still looked through you when opportunities opened. Church people who could discern gifting on a conference stage but missed the oil on your life because it came dressed in humility and ordinary clothes. You kept thinking that if you just loved, harder, served longer, explained yourself better, or stayed patient enough, eventually they would see you clearly. And sometimes they never do. That is one of the painful lessons of maturity. Not everybody who has access to your life has the vision to interpret your value. Not everybody near your purpose is assigned to affirm it. Some people can sit at your table and still be blind to the grace on you. Some can hear your testimony and still reduce you to the chapter where you struggled. Some can benefit from your kindness and still speak about you as though you are small. But their blindness is not your definition. Their inability to honor you is not evidence that there is nothing honorable in you. It may simply mean that what God placed inside you requires spiritual eyesight they do not possess. And for many of you, the humiliation was not just that you were overlooked. It was that you stayed dependable anyway. You were the one who still showed up when your own heart was tired. You still brought casseroles when your own home felt lonely. You still sent birthday cards, still made the phone call, still offered grace, still held the family together when everybody else was acting like children in grown bodies. You still kept your word. You still kept the faith. You still kept praying for people who did not know how to speak gently to you. There is a holy dignity in that kind of life even when nobody applauds it. And heaven has been taking note of all of it, because one of the deepest deceptions the enemy uses against faithful people is the lie that invisibility equals insignificance. It does not. Hidden is not the same as forgotten. Overlooked by people is not the same as overlooked by God. Quiet is not weak. Gentle is not powerless. Different is not defective. The very things that caused people to mislabel you may be the exact traits God is preserving because they are tied to your assignment. Your sensitivity may be connected to discernment. Your quietness may be connected to depth. Your restraint may be connected to wisdom. Your refusal to perform may be connected to spiritual maturity. Your discomfort with fake environments may be connected to the fact that your spirit was never built to live on shallow things. That is why you need to stop interpreting human dismissal as divine disapproval. God did not place all that endurance, mercy, and clarity in you by accident. You have survived things that should have made you hard, bitter, and cynical, yet there is still softness in your spirit, still longing in your prayer life, still a reverence for God in you. That is not weakness, that is evidence of grace. And once that begins to settle into your bones, something changes. You start to realize that people did not overlook you because there was nothing there. Many overlooked you because there was something there they could not control, could not use cheaply, and could not fully understand. That realization does not make you arrogant. It makes you freer. It helps you stop begging to be correctly interpreted by people committed to shallow readings of your life. It helps you stop letting underqualified opinions sit in the judge's chair of your soul. It helps you understand that God can affirm you even while people minimize you, and He can prepare honor for you while others are still speaking to you like you are common. And that is exactly why those long silent years were not empty, because the season that felt like delay was actually doing a deeper work than public recognition ever could. You remember those years maybe too well. Years when life did not look dramatic enough for anybody to call it a testimony, yet it felt heavy enough that only God knew how much it was costing you to stay steady. You kept going to work. You paid the electric bill and then stared at the bank account. You sat at the kitchen table with a Bible, a cup of coffee gone cold, and questions you did not know how to put into polished Christian language. You folded laundry while asking God why it seemed like everybody else was moving forward and you were still carrying the same burdens. You listened to worship music in the car because that 10-minute drive home was the only place you could cry without somebody needing something from you. You stood in your laundry room whispering prayers because it was the one door in the house you could close. You washed dishes and tried not to replay the words people had spoken over you. You laid awake at 2 a.m. asking whether you had missed God, whether your best years were behind you, whether all your faithfulness was ever going to mean something visible. Those are the years people rarely celebrate. There was no stage, no spotlight, no big announcement. Just ordinary American life and the quiet endurance of a person trying not to let disappointment turn into unbelief. But those years were not wasted. They were weight training for your spirit. They were not glamorous, but they were sacred. God was building something in you that could not be manufactured in a season of easy applause. He was teaching you how to live without constant affirmation. How to keep your heart clean when nobody was rewarding your obedience, how to hear His voice without needing an audience to confirm it. That kind of formation is expensive. It costs tears, time, and trust. It costs the surrender of your own timeline. It costs the breaking of the childish idea that if you do everything right, life will quickly make sense. But what it builds is sturdy. And God was after sturdy in you. Not flashy, not fragile, not easily inflated by praise and then shattered by criticism. He was building the kind of inner life that could hold weight when honor finally arrived. Because one of the mercies of God is that He often withholds visible elevation until a person has been strengthened enough to carry it without losing themselves. Had some of you received recognition too early, it would have fed wounds rather than healed them. Had you been promoted when you were still starving for human validation, the promotion would have become an idol. Had you been honored before God settled your identity, you might have mistaken applause for love and visibility for safety. So the hidden years were not punishment, they were protection. God was refusing to hand your future to the most unhealed version of you. He was teaching you to stand in quiet rooms and still know who you are. He was teaching you to pray without immediate proof. He was teaching you to endure the ache of being underestimated without becoming cheap in your spirit. He was teaching you to recognize motives, to notice red flags, to stop idolizing open doors that came with the wrong piece. He was teaching you discernment. And discernment is not learned in theory. It is learned in the uncomfortable school of lived experience. You learned what manipulation sounds like when it comes dressed in concern. You learned what shallow support looks like when it disappears the moment you need something real. You learned that not every invitation is alignment, not every compliment is covenant, not every church environment is healthy, just because it uses the name of Jesus, and not every opportunity is from God, just because it flatters your ego. Those silent years sharpened your ability to tell the difference. They also built endurance in you, the kind older believers especially understand. Not the noisy kind of endurance that gets quoted on coffee mugs, but the lived kind. The kind that gets up and goes to work anyway. The kind that keeps praying for prodigal children. The kind that keeps loving after disappointment. The kind that shows up for Sunday service with tears hidden behind reading glasses. The kind that learns how to laugh again after months of heaviness. The kind that opens the mail even when the bills feel like too much. The kind that sits through another doctor appointment, another lonely holiday, another confusing season and still says, "Lord, I do not understand, but I am not letting go of you." That endurance is not small. Heaven treats it like gold. And along with endurance, God was growing humility in you. Real humility, not false modesty. Not the kind that insults what God gave you. The kind that no longer needs to make itself bigger or smaller to feel safe. The kind that can serve without self-erasure. The kind that can receive honor later because it has already learned obedience in obscurity. The kind that knows the gift belongs to God and the glory belongs to God, so there is no need to compete, scramble, or perform. That kind of humility is beautiful because it is strong. It does not panic when others are noticed first. It does not collapse when doors stay closed longer than expected. It waits, not perfectly, but faithfully. And, maybe most importantly, those years built emotional strength in you. Not emotional numbness, but emotional strength. There is a difference. Numb people stop feeling because they are shut down. Strong people keep feeling and still keep walking with God. Strong people cry and pray. Strong people get disappointed and stay soft before the Lord. Strong people admit they are tired without surrendering their hope. God was not trying to turn you into stone. He was teaching your heart how to survive weather without losing its capacity for life. So when you look back on the years that felt still barren, repetitive, and hidden, you need to stop calling them wasted. They were formative. They were the workshop where God was making your inner life match the level of honor He intends to release. Because when He brings you into a place where people can finally see what He has been building, you will need more than talent. You will need stability. You will need clarity. You will need enough healing not to chase old applause, enough wisdom not to reopen wrong doors, enough discernment not to confuse attention with love, and enough rootedness in God to remember who carried you when nobody else believed anything significant was happening. That is what the silent years were doing. They were training your soul to survive blessing without becoming lost in it. They were teaching you that God can do His deepest work where no one is posting, praising, or paying attention. And one day soon, when the same people who dismissed you begin to notice the weight, peace, favor, and authority resting on your life, you will understand that heaven was never late. It was preparing you in private for a public moment that would not crush you when it came. And as those hidden years kept doing their work, Another truth began to come into focus, and it was a painful one because not everyone who dismissed you was far away enough to blame on distance or ignorance. Some of the people who underestimated you had a front row seat to your struggle. They knew what you had carried. They heard the strain in your voice. They saw the fatigue in your eyes at family dinners, after funerals, after layoffs, after doctor visits, after another Christmas where everybody smiled for pictures while old wounds sat right there at the table like uninvited guests nobody wanted to name. Some of them were relatives who had known you since you were young, and because they knew your history, they kept acting like your past was your permanent address. They remembered the season when you were struggling, the marriage that hurt you, the financial setback, the anxious years, the child who went off course, the mistake you made under pressure, and they kept speaking to you from that old file folder as if God had not done any work in you since then. In so many American families, that is how dismissal works. It does not always come through open cruelty. Sometimes it comes through comparison. It comes through the sibling who is always held up as the successful one, the polished one, the one with the big house or the better title, while you become the dependable one, the strong one, the one who can handle it. And the terrible part about being the one who can handle it is that people often stop asking what it costs you to keep holding everything together. They assume your silence means strength with no scars. They assume your faith means you do not feel the sting. They assume your kindness means you do not notice the disrespect. But you noticed. You noticed when they called your brother ambitious and called you intense. You noticed when they praised somebody else for traits they criticized in you. You noticed how quickly some people celebrated others for being bold while telling you to be more realistic, more modest, more quiet, more small. And because these were not strangers but familiar faces, their dismissal cut differently. It got into your prayers. It followed you home from reunions and phone calls and left you standing in the kitchen afterward, staring at the counter, replaying the conversation and wondering why being around people who are supposed to be yours can leave you feeling so alone. And it was not only family. Some of those people sat beside you in church. They knew your prayer requests. They heard your testimony. They watched you serve. They hugged you in the lobby, said, "I'm praying for you," and still never really saw you. Church hurt has a quiet sting when it comes not from one dramatic betrayal, but from being consistently overlooked in a place that teaches love from the pulpit. You showed up early, stayed late, volunteered when others stayed home, gave when money was tight, showed kindness to people who did not know half your story, and yet somehow the room seemed to make space for personalities before it made space for character. You watched people celebrate charisma while ignoring faithfulness. You watched louder voices get platformed while deeper people got used. You watched some believers treat discernment like negativity whenever you noticed something unhealthy. And because you loved God, because you respected the church, because you did not want to be cynical, you tried to tell yourself it did not matter. But it did matter. It mattered because you were not craving applause. You were craving honest recognition. You were craving the simple dignity of being seen clearly in a place where people talk about spiritual sight. There are people who love you as long as you stay in the role they assign to you. They support you while you are serving, while you are giving, while you are helping, while you are carrying, while you are making them comfortable. But the moment your growth requires them to change how they see you, they pull back. The moment your healing means you set a boundary, they call you cold. The moment your calling begins to sharpen, they act uncomfortable. The moment you stop apologizing for the weight of your spirit, they start using words like pride or distance or you've changed. Of course you changed. God has been changing you the whole time. But some people were only comfortable with the version of you that asked for less, needed less, and threatened nothing in them. That is why familiarity can be so blinding. People who have watched your ordinary routines can become unable to imagine your sacred assignment. They know how you take your coffee, how you laugh, how you drive, how you sit in the same pew, how you bring the potato salad to the family cookout, how you answer texts too late because life is heavy. And because they know the natural details of your life, they start assuming there cannot be anything unusual about the grace on you. But Scripture has always shown that the people nearest to a calling are not always the first to honor it. Joseph's brothers saw the same coat everybody talks about, but they did not see the future attached to it. Jesus went back to people who knew his hometown and found that familiarity had drained their ability to receive what was standing in front of them. And that same pattern still plays out in ordinary American life. People can know your address, your history, your salary range, your disappointments, your family drama, and still have no clue what God is building in you. They may know the chapter where you are hurting and miss the chapter where heaven is rewriting you. They may know your pain and still not recognize your purpose. That is why some of your loneliest seasons happened in crowded rooms. You were not just isolated by strangers. You were isolated by people who had enough access to know better and still chose the shallow reed. Friends disappeared when life got complicated. They were available when things were light, social, and easy. But when your season got heavy, when you were caring for aging parents, grieving a loss, navigating financial pressure, dealing with health scares, or simply too tired to perform normalcy, they drifted. Some of them did not know how to handle your sorrow because your sorrow required depth, and not everybody has depth to give. Some only liked the version of you that was encouraging, upbeat, and spiritually useful to them. Once you needed support instead of offering it, they grew quiet. That kind of silence can shake a person. It can make you wonder whether love was ever really love, or just convenience wearing church clothes. But even there, God was teaching you something hard and holy. He was showing you that access and assignment are not the same thing. Just because someone has access to your life does not mean they are assigned to understand your soul. Just because someone has known you a long time does not mean they have the oil to speak over your future. Just because somebody can describe your pain does not mean they can interpret your purpose. And once that truth begins to settle in, it untangles something inside you. You stop bleeding for the approval of people whose vision has already proven too small. You stop forcing yourself to fit inside other people's expectations just because they have been around for a long time. You begin to understand that God may have allowed certain dismissals, not because he agreed with them, but because he was exposing where human love was conditional, where human support was shallow, and where your identity had become too dependent on being recognized by the wrong eyes. Still knowing that spiritually does not erase the emotional cost, because the wound went deep, and God in his wisdom often lets a wound be felt deeply so that the healing will be undeniable when it comes. You did not just bounce back. You did not just shrug and say it's all good and move on like nothing happened. There were nights when the words people spoke over you replayed in your head with cruel clarity. There were mornings when you woke up already tired because your mind had been arguing. Old conversations before your feet even touched the floor. You questioned yourself. You questioned your tone, your timing, your discernment, your memory. You wondered whether maybe you really were too much in some ways, too little in others. Too emotional, too slow, too guarded, too hopeful, too trusting, too sensitive to survive this world without getting bruised over and over again. That is what repeated dismissal can do. It can make a sincere person interrogate themselves more harshly than they ever interrogate the people who wounded them. And many of those moments happened in painfully ordinary settings. After a phone call with family, you sat in silence and looked at the wall, because you did not even have the energy to explain to anybody why your chest felt heavy again. You typed messages and deleted them because you were tired of speaking into conversations where nobody really wanted truth, only compliance. You scrolled past photos of people who had hurt you and noticed they seemed to be doing just fine, smiling at restaurants, posting vacation pictures, living their lives without any visible consequence while you were still carrying the ache of what they left on your spirit. That can test a believer. It can make you ask questions nobody says out loud in Bible study. Lord, why does it look like the careless keep moving while the careful keep bleeding? Why do the people who speak sharply seem so light, while the ones who held their tongue go home carrying all the weight? Why am I still shaking from something they probably forgot 5 minutes after saying it? Those are not signs of weak faith. Those are the honest groanings of a human heart under pressure. And God is not offended by the honesty of his people. In fact, some of the deepest healing begins when you finally bring him the real ache instead of the cleaned-up church version of it. Because before public honor could arrive, private restoration had to happen. God was not only preparing something around you, he was restoring something within you. He was healing an identity that had been bruised by years of subtle diminishment. He was going down into the places where you had started confusing mistreatment with truth. He was touching the part of you that began to think being overlooked meant being ordinary. The part of you that began to believe that if nobody affirmed you, maybe there was nothing to affirm. And healing at that level is rarely dramatic at first. Often it starts quietly. It starts the day you no longer feel compelled to answer every disrespectful text. It starts when you sit in church and realize you are listening for God again, not for whether people are noticing you. It starts when you open your Bible and a verse you have read 100 times suddenly lands like medicine. It starts when you hear the Lord remind you that your worth was never on layaway waiting for human approval to release it. It starts when you can say without bitterness, "They were wrong about me," and without pride, "God is still working on me." That is mature healing. It does not need revenge to feel real. It does not need everybody to apologize before peace can return. It just needs truth to get stronger than the lie. And slowly, sometimes, so slowly, you only notice in hindsight, the Lord begins to steady you. The insecurity does not run the whole room anymore. The old comments still exist in your memory, but they stop governing your identity. The ache still flickers now and then, especially around familiar people, but it no longer owns your nervous system. You are not healed because the past never happened. You are healed because the past is losing its authority to define what God says about you now. And that kind of healing matters because public honor on top of private insecurity is dangerous. If God had elevated you before healing you, you might have used the blessing to medicate the wound. You might have mistaken being noticed for being loved. You might have chased vindication instead of walking in peace. So the Lord in his mercy kept working where nobody could see. He let the wound come into full view not to destroy you, but so he could restore you all the way down to the root. He was teaching you that your identity is not built on who stayed, who clapped, who approved, or who dismissed you. Your identity is built on the God who saw you when nobody knew what they were looking at, the God who stayed near when people were shallow, the God who counted every tear and never once confused your hidden season with a worthless one. And when that kind of restoration takes hold, something sacred happens. You no longer need the same people to understand you in order for you to move forward. You no longer need the room to validate what heaven has already named. You become quieter in some ways, but stronger in deeper ways. Not hard, not bitter, not shut down. Just rooted, just clear, just less available for confusion. And that is when honor can begin to land on a life without ruining it, because now it has somewhere healthy to rest. And somewhere in the middle of all that private restoration, the shift began. Not when everybody suddenly understood you, not when the apology arrived, not when the room changed, but when you stopped begging to be seen by people who had already shown you they preferred the smaller version of you. That is where the turning happened. It was quiet at first, almost easy to miss. Maybe it happened one Tuesday morning when you looked at a text message from a family member, read the usual tone between the lines, and for the first time did not feel called to defend yourself. Maybe it happened after another Sunday service, when you realized you were more drained by the environment than nourished by it, and you finally admitted to God that staying in a place that kept bruising your spirit was not loyalty, it was fear. Maybe it happened at work when you caught yourself over-explaining your worth to people who had been benefiting from your labor for years and still acting like your contribution was replaceable. Maybe it happened in your own kitchen with bills spread across the table and the evening news humming in the background when you whispered, "Lord, I am done performing for people who will never clap for the right reasons." However it happened, the holy shift began when you stopped treating human recognition like oxygen. You stopped shrinking so other people could stay comfortable. You stopped dressing down your convictions just to keep the peace at the family barbecue, the church committee meeting, the office lunch, the holiday table. You stopped translating your pain into softer language so everybody else could stay unbothered. You stopped trying to earn tenderness from people who had made a habit of misunderstanding you, and that kind of change is rarely loud in American life. It does not always look like a dramatic speech or a big public exit. Often it looks like boundaries. It looks like no longer answering disrespect immediately just because somebody is family. It looks like leaving a church culture that loved your service more than your soul. It looks like turning down the extra project at work because exhaustion is not the same thing as faithfulness. It looks like not volunteering to be the emotional janitor for every broken room. It looks like refusing to wear yourself out, proving your worth to grown people who only value what is flashy, convenient, or loud. There comes a point in many believers' lives, especially after 40, after 50, after enough disappointments and enough Sunday mornings, where you praised God with tears behind your eyes, where you begin to realize that constant self-abandonment is not humility. It is fear with church language on top of it. And God, because He loves you too much to leave you there, begins to call you into a new kind of obedience, the obedience of peace. Not passivity, not coldness, not pride, but peace. The peace that no longer rushes to explain itself to people who have already rehearsed their version of you. The peace that can say no without writing a 10-page emotional essay in your head all night long. The peace that lets some calls go to voicemail. The peace that can sit at a family gathering, hear the old pattern starting up, and quietly refuse to step back into the role they saved for your former self. That is not rebellion, that is maturity. And it matters because honor often begins in the exact moment you stop worshiping approval. As long as your heart is chained to being understood by the wrong people, you are too vulnerable to manipulation. As long as your sense of worth rises and falls with who noticed you, who included you, who praised you, who posted you, who called you back, you will keep handing your peace to people who did not pay the price for it. But when God begins to settle you, something firm and clean grows inside. You no longer need to be loud to be clear. You no longer need to chase the room. You no longer need to exhaust yourself making sure everybody sees your heart correctly. Your life begins to simplify. Your spirit gets quieter. Your decisions become cleaner. You start to prefer what brings peace over what brings visibility. You start asking less, "Who noticed me?" and more, "Lord, are you pleased with how I handled that?" That is a major turning point for the chosen one, because heaven can trust a person with visible honor once that person is no longer desperate for visible approval. And once that shift begins, you start recognizing something else that many people miss, which is that God's honor does not always arrive the way church people imagine it will. It does not always come with a microphone, a title, or a spotlight on a stage. Sometimes God honors you in the places where people once dismissed you most casually, right out in public life, where everybody can see the difference. Sometimes it shows up in a job situation that finally turns after years of being overlooked. The same company that kept treating you like background noise suddenly depends on your wisdom when a crisis hits. The same people who passed over you start asking for your insight because your consistency outlasted their politics. Sometimes it comes as a financial turnaround after years of careful stewardship, quiet sacrifice, coupon-cutting faith, and whispered prayers over grocery receipts and mortgage statements. You did not become reckless. You did not scheme. You kept trusting God. And one day the pressure eases in a way people around you cannot explain. Sometimes honor looks like a restored home, not a perfect one, but a peaceful one. A house where the old tension finally breaks. A relationship with your adult children that begins to heal. A marriage that survives a season that should have buried it. A lonely season that gives way to real companionship after years of asking whether anybody would ever truly know you. Sometimes honor looks like emotional stability, and people underestimate that one because it does not photograph well. But to the person who has fought private battles, sleeping through the night after months of anxiety is honor. Opening the mail without dread is honor. Walking into church without bracing yourself for another subtle wound is honor. Laughing from your belly again after years of heaviness is honor. Being able to sit at your own kitchen table in silence and not feel like silence is swallowing you whole, that is honor too. God is not shallow. He is not limited to public Christian theater. He can crown a life with dignity in ways that fit the reality of ordinary American days. It may be the business you kept building in faith finally becoming steady. It may be a ministry opportunity that comes not because you campaigned for it, but because somebody finally recognizes the weight you carry. It may be your children, after years of watching you choose integrity over drama, beginning to see that what they once took for granted was actually strength. It may be your extended family realizing that the person they quietly treated as least significant became the most stable one among them all. That happens more than people admit. The one who was labeled too emotional becomes the wisest voice in the room. The one who was underestimated becomes the one everybody calls when life falls apart. The one who was never celebrated for being dependable becomes the one whose life now carries the clearest evidence of God's hand. That is because divine honor is not always glamorous, but it is unmistakable. It has weight. It changes the atmosphere around a person. People start noticing that you are not scrambling the way you used to. You are not trying to be chosen by every room. You are not panicking when plans shift. You are not overreacting to disrespect. You are not begging for crumbs where you once would have stayed too long. There is a steadiness on you, a settledness, a brightness without performance, and others can feel it before they can name it. Your life becomes the proof. And that kind of proof often speaks loudest in the very spaces where you were once reduced because God has a way of letting the same people who counted you out watch Him establish you without your having to say a word. That is where the emotional payoff begins, and it is tender because it is not about revenge. By now, God has done too much healing in you for this to be about getting even. You are not fantasizing about humiliating people. You are not preparing a speech for the next reunion, the next church event, the next staff meeting. The flesh may have wanted that once, back when the wound was still raw, and all you could think about was being vindicated. But God has been too deep in your heart for that now. Still, there is a holy irony in what He does. He often lets the reversal happen in front of the same eyes that once dismissed you. The same relatives who talked down to you at reunions, who compared you to more successful siblings, who treated your spiritual sensitivity like weakness, will have to watch a different story unfold on your life. The same church people who did not call when you were hurting, who missed the oil on you because it did not come wrapped in charisma, will have to watch God use your faithfulness in ways that cannot be ignored. The same co-workers who assumed you would always stay in the background will have to reckon with the fact that your wisdom carried more weight than all their noise. And the beautiful part is that you will not need to announce it. You will not need to defend it. You will not need to force anyone to admit anything. The Lord Himself will cause your life to speak. That is how He likes to do it. Quietly at first, then undeniably. The peace on you will speak. The doors opening will speak. The restoration in your home will speak. The clarity in your mind will speak. The dignity in your posture will speak. The favor on your decisions will speak. The way you no longer chase panic, plead, and overextend yourself will speak. And for many of the people who misjudged you, that will be more confronting than any confrontation you could have arranged. Because when God establishes a person, it exposes how wrongly people read them. It reveals that what looked small was being preserved. What looked delayed was being prepared. What looked weak was actually restrained strength. You may find yourself in rooms where the dynamic has changed without anyone naming it out loud. The family member who used to patronize you now asks your opinion. The church person who once overlooked you now treats you with a careful respect. The workplace that ignored your value now leans on your judgment. The people who wrote you off cannot quite explain why the atmosphere shifts when you walk in, but they can feel it. That is not your ego swelling. That is the residue of God's faithfulness becoming visible. And there is something deeply satisfying in the holiest sense about watching God answer false labels without using your mouth, especially for those of you who have spent years trying to explain your heart to people who preferred their own assumption. There comes a day when you realize that explanation is no longer your assignment. Fruit is, peace is, obedience is. Let God talk through the life He is building. Let Him answer through the doors. He opens the stability, He gives the healing. He completes the favor He places on your name. Because the same people who once saw you as forgettable are going to witness grace on you they cannot deny. And you will know in that moment that heaven never lost track of you for a second. And as that visible honor begins to settle on your life, one of the first things God makes clear is that this is not about pride, not about finally getting your turn to feel superior, not about making a grand entrance so the people who doubted you can choke on their own opinions. That would be too small for what heaven is doing. What God is releasing in your life is not ego fuel. It is correction. It is the Lord setting the record straight in a way only He can. Because for years, people put the wrong name on what they saw in you. They called restraint weakness because they did not understand the strength it took for you not to answer in the flesh. They called your hidden season failure because they had no discernment for preparation. They called your silence passivity because they did not know that some people are quiet, not because they are empty, but because they are deep. They called your delay rejection because they had never learned that God often protects what is precious by hiding it until the timing is right. And if you are not careful, after enough years of hearing the wrong label from enough familiar voices, you can begin to wear those names like borrowed clothes. You can start calling yourself what other people once called you. You can begin to believe you really were behind, really were less than really were the problem, really were too much, really were not enough. That is why this honor has to be understood correctly. It is not just a blessing around you. It is a healing verdict over you. It is God confronting old lies with visible evidence. It is the Lord answering years of quiet shame with the kind of fruit no human being can fake. Because shame has a way of staying long after the event is over. It lingers in how you enter rooms. It lingers in how quickly you apologize. It lingers in how you talk down your own gifts before anybody else can. It lingers in how hard it is for some of you even now to receive a compliment without deflecting it, because deep down you still expect to be corrected, minimized, or misunderstood. Shame trains a person to shrink before life has even asked them to, and what God is doing now is bigger than opening a door. He is restoring scale. He is teaching you how to see yourself in truth, not as better than others, but as correctly measured at last. Not inflated, not self-important, not loud for the sake of being noticed, but clean in your identity. Grounded, settled, free from the old addiction to disappearing so other people can stay comfortable. For some of you, this correction is happening in very ordinary places. You are not hearing angels sing in the ceiling tiles. You are just noticing that the words that used to crush you do not land the same anymore. You are noticing that when somebody tries to reduce you, something inside you stays steady. You are noticing that you no longer leave every family interaction feeling guilty for existing. You are noticing that your prayer life sounds less like begging for permission to matter and more like agreement with what God already said. You are noticing that old insecurities are losing oxygen. That is correction. When you stop interpreting your life through the eyes of people who misread it, that is correction. When you realize you are not overlooked because there was nothing there, but often because what was there carried a weight others did not know how to honor, that is correction. When you stop calling your season wasted and start recognizing it as training, that is correction. Heaven is not merely handing you something nice after a hard time. Heaven is rewriting the meaning of the hard time itself. And there is something deeply sacred about that, especially for the American believer who has spent years trying to stay faithful in the middle of very unglamorous battles. The kind nobody posts about. The kind that happen in split-level homes, on worn couches, in pickup trucks, in apartment kitchens, in long commutes in middle age, in the tension between Sunday faith and Monday reality. The kind where you are still praising God while trying to keep up with insurance calls, rising costs, caregiving, church disappointment, adult children making painful choices, or a life that does not look anything like what you thought it would by now. In those places, people can start to assume that if your story is not flashy, it must not be favored. But God has never judged a life by surface shine. He judges by faithfulness, by obedience, by the hidden yes no one else heard. And when He finally brings honor to a person like that, it becomes a witness not only to the people around them, but to the person themselves. Because some of you need to see with your own eyes that God did not miss you. You need to feel in a way that lands below theology and into your bones that he was there for every tear at the sink, every lonely drive home, every time you kept your mouth shut because you feared saying the wrong thing, every time you chose character over retaliation, every time you served while hurting, every time you thought, Lord, does any of this matter? This honor becomes God's answer to that question. Yes, it mattered. Yes, he saw it. Yes, he was there. Yes, he was shaping something people could not yet interpret. That is why the blessing often feels so emotional when it finally comes. Not because it is the biggest thing that ever happened, but because it touches the oldest bruise. It reaches back into years of being reduced and says that was never your true name. It reaches into the places where you felt discarded and says you were being preserved. It reaches into the memories where you thought heaven was silent and says, I was not absent, I was building. And once that correction begins to settle, you start walking differently. You stop overqualifying your own presence. You stop apologizing for your depth. You stop acting like your peace needs permission from people who only knew how to relate to your wounds. There is a cleaner authority on you. Not the brittle authority of somebody trying to prove a point, but the quiet authority of somebody who has finally stopped arguing with God about what he put inside them. And that is exactly where the next layer of discernment becomes necessary, because when God honors you, it often exposes who really loved you and who merely tolerated you while you were easy to overlook. Not everyone will celebrate this shift with a clean heart. Some people will smile, but it will not reach their eyes. Some will suddenly remember your phone number after months or years of distance. Some will act supportive now that the blessing is visible, now that the peace is visible, now that the favor is visible, now that your life carries the kind of evidence they cannot mock without feeling foolish. This is where many chosen people get tested again, because attention can feel dangerously close to love when you have gone a long time without being understood. A text message arrives from someone who was absent in your wilderness. A relative starts speaking proudly about you after years of comparison. Somebody from church who never called when you were bleeding now wants to reconnect because your gift is becoming useful in a way they can finally recognize. A co-worker who overlooked you for years starts acting warm the moment your value becomes obvious to leadership. And if your healing is not rooted, that kind of delayed attention can pull you right back into old confusion. You can mistake renewed interest for repentance. You can mistake curiosity for care. You can mistake somebody liking your glow for somebody honoring the oil that cost you everything. But God is maturing you beyond that, because honor reveals hearts. It does not just elevate you, it uncovers people. It lets you see who loved you when there was nothing public to gain from standing near you. Real love was with you in the hidden years. Real love was the friend who checked on you when your world got quiet. Real love was the sister in Christ who prayed with you when all you had was confusion and grocery store grief, and that exhausted look in your eyes that said you were trying your best not to fall apart in public. Real love was the person who treated you with dignity when your life did not look impressive. Real love was the child who noticed your consistency before the world ever did. Real love was the small circle, sometimes painfully small, that did not need proof of your value because they had the heart to recognize it before the crowd did. Those are your people. Those are the ones who did not require public evidence before they offered private honor. And when God starts establishing you, you begin to notice the difference between those who are assigned to your soul and those who are merely attached to your season. Some people only liked you manageable. Some only liked you accessible, overgiving, emotionally available on demand, willing to explain, willing to absorb. willing to stay in the role that made them comfortable. But once God stabilizes you, once your boundaries are healthier, once your peace is less negotiable, once your calling is more visible, their discomfort starts talking. They may call you changed. They may act confused by your distance when what they are really encountering is your maturity. They may interpret your clarity as pride because clarity no longer gives them the same access. And this is where wisdom matters. You do not need to become cynical, suspicious, or hard. You do not need to assume everybody who reappears has bad motives. But you also do not need to reopen every old door just because the atmosphere has changed. Maturity knows how to receive honor without returning to old bondage. Maturity knows how to smile without surrendering discernment. Maturity knows how to thank God for the shift without handing old people the keys to newly healed rooms. For many of you in this stage of life, that lesson is especially important because you were raised to be polite, to keep the peace, to answer the call, to attend the reunion, to smooth things over, to be the bigger person again and again, until being the bigger person quietly became being the more wounded person. But God is teaching you a holier version of love, now one that includes truth. One that understands that forgiveness does not mean unlimited access. One that understands that reconciliation requires more than nostalgia. One that understands that just because someone is impressed by the fruit does not mean they were faithful during the root season. And you are allowed to honor what God has done in you by protecting it. You are allowed to notice who only shows up once the garden blooms. You are allowed to give thanks for the correction without pretending everybody who misread you has suddenly become safe. Because the same God who opens doors also teaches stewardship. The same God who brings you into visible honor also teaches you how not to waste it by falling back into old emotional hunger. You do not need every late compliment. You do not need every delayed embrace. You do not need everyone to finally say the perfect words. At this point, the deepest part of you already knows. God saw. God kept. God corrected. God established. And the people who truly loved you were never confused by your hidden season. They may not have fully understood it, but they honored you inside it. They prayed when others speculated. They stayed when others drifted. They gave grace when others gave labels. Those are the relationships that can come forward with clean weight now. Those are the voices that can be trusted in the new season. And the rest you can place gently in God's hands without bitterness. That is what spiritual maturity looks like here. Not revenge, not coldness, not naivete either. Just a clean heart and clear eyes. A person who can receive public honor without letting public honor become their new weakness. A person who can enjoy the fruit without forgetting what it costs to grow it. A person who can recognize that some claps come late and some love comes disguised as interest once the blessing is visible. And because God has done such a deep work in you, you are no longer desperate enough to confuse the two. And by the time you reach this final turn in the story, you understand something you could not have understood at the beginning, because back then you were still measuring everything by what was missing, by who did not call, by who did not choose you, by who looked right through your faithfulness as if it were wallpaper. But now the picture has changed, and what is rising in your life is not cheap excitement, not the shallow thrill of finally being noticed. Not the kind of blessing that makes people loud for a week and empty again by the next hard season. What is coming to you carries the weight of something holy, because it was born in obscurity. It was formed in the kind of places American life rarely celebrates, in the plain rooms and ordinary routines where no one hands out trophies. It was formed while you sat at a kitchen table with unopened mail and a Bible you were trying to trust one more day. It was formed while you drove home from work with worship music low in the background because you were too tired to sing, but too desperate not to listen. It was formed while you stood in line at the pharmacy, while you waited in doctors' offices, while you folded laundry for a family that did not always know what it cost you to keep being steady, while you showed up to church carrying burdens nobody could see under your Sunday clothes. That is why the honor you are about to receive will not feel casual to you. It will not feel random. It will not even feel merely pleasant. It will feel sacred because deep in your spirit, you will know exactly where it came from. It came through tears no one saw. It came through prayers no one heard. It came through obedience no one applauded. It came through endurance no one rewarded. And that kind of blessing lands differently. It does not make you puffed up. It makes you quiet. It makes you sit still. It makes you stare at the goodness of God with tears in your eyes because you realize He remembered every hidden thing. There are breakthroughs that look impressive from the outside and mean almost nothing on the inside. And then there are breakthroughs like this one, the kind that put dignity back where life had worn grooves of shame. The kind that do not simply change circumstances but restore meaning. The kind that feel like God placing His hand gently but firmly on the life people mishandled and saying this was never common to me. That is why some of you will not shout first when this shift becomes visible. You will cry first. You will sit in your own home and cry. You will stand at the sink and cry. You will park the car in the driveway and cry. Not because you are surprised that God is faithful, but because He was faithful in such a detailed way. He did not bless you with some generic answer dropped from a distance. He answered in a way that reached all the way back to the places where you had been bruised. He remembered the rooms where you felt invisible. He remembered the years where you were useful but uncelebrated. He remembered the family dynamics that made you question your own value. He remembered the church hurt you, tried to downplay because you did not want to sound bitter. He remembered the nights you could not sleep because your mind kept replaying conversations. He remembered the private restraint it took not to say what your flesh wanted to say. He remembered every time you chose character while others chose convenience. And when God honors a person with that kind of memory, it feels holy because it reveals that heaven was paying attention all along. This is where the chosen one finally sees the hidden years correctly. They were not blank years. They were not dead years. They were not evidence that you had somehow missed your life. They were seed years. They were root years. And roots are never glamorous when they are forming. Nobody gathers around to applaud a root system. Nobody posts about the buried part. Nobody congratulates the tree for what is still underground. But if the roots do not go deep, the life above ground cannot hold weight when storms come or fruit starts to appear. And your roots had to go deep. They had to go down into trust, into endurance, into humility, into dependence on God that was not performative and not borrowed from somebody else's sermon. You had to learn how to live before God when there was nothing public to prove that your faith was working. You had to learn how to keep showing up in very American, very ordinary, very unspectacular circumstances. To keep paying your bills as best you could. To keep loving difficult people without losing your soul. To keep praying over your children when they made choices you could not control. To keep standing in a church culture that did not always know how to recognize depth without turning hard. To keep doing honest work even when the louder people got promoted. To keep being dependable in a world that rewards image. To keep your integrity when cutting corners would have been easier. Those were holy acts even when they looked small. In the kingdom of God, hidden faithfulness is never small. It may be hidden from crowds, but it is never hidden from heaven. And this is why the honor about to come over your life will feel weighty. It is not simply the reward of a moment. It is the fruit of 1,000 quiet yeses. It is the result of a life that kept leaning toward God even while carrying disappointment. It is the consequence of staying soft before the Lord when bitterness would have been easier. Some of you are still tempted to downplay that. You still want to say, "Well, I was just doing what I had to do." But that is exactly the point. You were faithful in the things nobody romanticizes. You were faithful in middle age, in routine, in repetition, in discouragement, in the ordinary pressures of American life that wear on people day after day. You were faithful when gas prices went up, when groceries cost more, when retirement did not look as secure as you hoped, when your body felt older, when your heart felt tired, when your church experience got complicated, when your family needed more from you than they ever thanked you for. You did not do it perfectly, but you stayed with God inside it, and heaven sees that kind of faithfulness as precious. There is something else you are beginning to understand too, and it is this. The blessing means so much because it did not come fast enough to flatter your ego. It came late enough to heal your soul. If it had come earlier, you might have worn it like armor against your insecurity. You might have used it to prove something. You might have held it too tightly because you still needed it to answer wounds God had not yet touched. But now, after all this hidden work, the honor can land without becoming your idol. The breakthrough can arrive without becoming your personality. The open door can appear without convincing you that the door itself is your savior. That is maturity, and it is part of why this moment will feel so clean. You are not receiving it as a starving ego. You are receiving it as a healed spirit. And healed people experience blessing differently. They do not clutch at it in panic. They do not turn it into a weapon. They do not need to wave it around in the faces of those who once overlooked them. They simply recognize it, receive it, and give God the glory because they know what it took for them to still be standing here with their heart intact. For some, this holy honor will come in a form the world might call modest. It may not be national platform viral attention or anything flashy enough for social media to lose its mind over. It may look like peace in your home after years of tension. It may look like being financially steadier than you have been in a long time. It may look like your adult child finally seeing your heart. It may look like your grandchildren recognizing the wisdom in you that others once dismissed. It may look like your name carrying favor in rooms where your character is now visible. It may look like a ministry opportunity that fits your actual calling instead of the role people tried to force on you. It may look like waking up without that old desperation hanging over your chest. Do not underestimate those forms of honor. In many ways, they are holier than applause because they touch the actual places where you lived and grieved and waited. They are not symbolic. They are personal. They tell the truth about what you really needed, and they prove that God was not blessing a version of your life He imagined from a distance. He was blessing the one you actually lived. And as this becomes real, you will start noticing that the old temptation to explain yourself is losing its grip for good. That is one of the clearest signs that the process is complete. You no longer need to narrate your own worth to people who lack the vision to see it. You no longer need to stand on trial in your own mind every time somebody from the past misread you. Your life itself is becoming the answer. The peace on you is an answer. The stability on you is an answer. The healed boundaries are an answer. The quiet authority in your voice is an answer. The blessing on your work is an answer. The way you can now sit in settings that once triggered old shame and remain inwardly settled is an answer. Your life is beginning to answer every false label without needing your mouth to defend it. And that is exactly how God loves to do this. He does not always vindicate with arguments. He often vindicates with fruit. Fruit that can be seen. Fruit that can be tasted. Fruit that exposes how wrong people were without requiring you to become their prosecutor. That is why this ending is not noisy. It is strong. It is not dramatic. It is settled. The chosen one is not becoming arrogant. The chosen one is becoming established. There is a difference. Arrogance still needs witnesses. Establishment only needs God. Arrogance still performs. Establishment rests. Arrogance needs enemies to stay emotionally important. Establishment releases them and keeps walking. And that is where this story returns to where it began, with you sitting in that car after church, still in the same town, still with the same roads outside the windshield, still with the same visible life on the surface from now, but with something entirely different happening inside. The parking lot is quieter now. Most people have already gone home. Maybe there is a coffee cup in the console, a Bible on the passenger seat, a church bulletin folded beside you, and the old version of you would have stayed there asking heaven for proof again. The old version of you would have replayed who spoke and who did not, who smiled and who overlooked you, who called this week and who forgot you again. The old version of you would have gone home, still measuring your worth by human response. But that is not where you are anymore. Something holy has settled in. You are no longer begging heaven for proof that you matter. You are no longer measuring your life by who clapped, who called, who stayed, or who dismissed you. You understand now at a level deeper than theory that God has been watching the whole time. The overlooked years were not evidence of failure. They were part of a divine pattern. The hidden season was not a sign that your life was being wasted. It was where your roots went down, where your identity was healed, where your character was strengthened, where your spirit was taught to carry the kind of honor that does not ruin a person when it comes. And now, soon in ways both quiet and unmistakable, God is about to honor you in front of the same people who doubted you. Not so you can become vain. Not so you can finally look down on those who once looked past you. But so, His faithfulness becomes visible. So the record is corrected. So the lies lose their voice. So the same people who read your life wrong have to watch God write over every false label with grace, dignity, peace, and favor. That is the holy certainty now resting on this story. Your life is about to speak with more authority than your explanations ever could. Your fruit is about to answer what your wounded heart once tried to defend. Your peace is about to preach a better sermon than your pain ever could. And the God who kept you hidden, the God who healed you in secret, the God who watched you stay faithful in rooms with no applause, is about to let that faithfulness shine in such a way that you will know beyond all doubt He never lost sight of you for even 1 second.